Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm, is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. It has many historic districts such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the center of Dallas Cheek. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2, 2015, at 7:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashim Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980, to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jameson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas where she began working at Smilazona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. 1 bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once unable to bear such a life, Steinkind attempted to hang himself, but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Deborah and Mark sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life, promising that it was all in the past. She got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision, leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. Rats again, she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Deborah struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left a tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach, followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" "Because your daughter wished it," the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. "It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together," she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steinke found it enticing but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to end their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside, despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. It was on June 25, 2001 and charged with first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail. The first trial soon commenced. The prosecution's main theory was the motive for the homicide. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be 2 silhouettes in a pool of blood. The boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying in the basement floor, all in blood, the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, they descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied, but there was no doubt. It was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess. No other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood, with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the body suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine, and where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home safe, or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her. Or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon detectives turned to the media requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime, or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name, as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Stunink, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police. But they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed, "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking at a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Letter, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinko were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinko and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened. After I found out, I accepted it. I loved Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him." Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator. Since breaking the suspects proved difficult, the investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. I took care of Deborah and Mark Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them, Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages confirming Jeremy's statements indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they have done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment. Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. I think it's the best love story of all time, Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Mark, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die, while Steinke was dealing with the parents downstairs, inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat as if carving a pumpkin. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood, while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created, using them to poison her husband, Gregory de Villiers, staging a suicide scene in their apartment, scattering his body with red rose petals. Case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the students' tragic end. They embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then, unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, but they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when asked by the prosecution why he committed the act. He replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings, but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing, as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs, medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Apparently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name, her true identity still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance while others believed she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Ms. Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell, and silently conceal. Sadly, the dead cannot speak. Jennifer's life was cut short in her prime. Regrettably, she realized too late an essential truth. Staying away from certain individuals and ceasing communication with them could mean saving oneself. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. His father was an alcoholic and largely unemployed, while his mother was a bitter and bigoted religious fanatic. Between the drinking and the excessive Bible reading, Gein may have ended up with what a child psychiatrist today might call trauma triggers, or PTSD. Later in life, he became obsessed with accounts of cannibals and Nazis in pulp fiction magazines, showing a tendency to enjoy a very specific kind of violence. His heavy emotional attachment to his mother may have badly affected his social development and even caused him to murder his own brother Henry, which was later referred to by his biographers as the Cain and Abel aspect of his case. After his mother's death, his mental instability spiraled. His other crimes included the murder and grave robbing of middle-aged women who resembled his mother, as his intention was apparently to create some kind of a woman's suit so he could crawl into the skin of these women and become his own mother resurrected. A police search of his home after his capture, following a particularly brutal murder, that of a neighboring female of around the right age, revealed among other evidence a disturbing diagram of the human adult female as a deceased work in progress. The evidence included whole human bones and fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on his bedposts, some female skulls with the tops off, bowls made from human skulls, a corset made from a female torso, skin from shoulders to waist, leggings made from human leg skin, and masks made from the skin of female heads. Gein apparently made a great deal of headway in constructing either a new woman, Frankenstein assembly style, or reconstructing his dead mother before he was captured. Gein could not stand trial due to his clear mental incompetence and was instead confined to a mental health facility. Later on, he was judged competent to stand trial where he was found guilty of murder but also pronounced legally insane and consequently remanded to a psychiatric institution. He died at Mendota Mental Health Institute in 1984. Psych profile. Gein was diagnosed as having been a schizophrenic as well as a sexual psychopath. His mental illness stemmed from his love-hate relationship towards women, which later turned into a full-scale psychosis. Gein was a necrophiliac, as body parts excited him sexually, though he denied ever actually having sex with the dead bodies that he murdered or exhumed from graveyards on the grounds that they smelled too bad. Media. Gein is actually the most famous serial killer on this list, though not necessarily under his own name. Due to the very specific and darkly grotesque nature of his crimes, Gein was the inspiration for several fictional serial killers, including Norman Bates, the killer from the movie Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, Leatherface, a skin-wearing killer from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Jamie Gumb, aka Buffalo Bill, a serial killer in The Silence of the Lambs. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes or H. Holmes, was born on May 16, 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. He came from a modest farming family who were descendants of the original English immigrants to the area and also happened to be devout Methodists. As a young man, Mudgett trained as a surgeon at the University of Michigan. So how did this man end up becoming known as America's first serial killer? Due to unreliable reporting and an era of great superstition, there was a lot of sensationalization and misinformation about this case for decades. Initially, reports by the Yellow Press, the supermarket tabloids of the time, often emphasized the existence of Holmes' murder castle, which was supposed to contain secret torture chambers, trapdoors, gas chambers, and a basement crematorium, but all of this was subsequently disproved. Holmes did have a history of selling cadavers to medical schools. However, he acquired his wares through grave robbing rather than murder. Other accounts claim that the building was made up of over 100 rooms and laid out like a maze, with doors opening into brick walls, windowless rooms, and dead-end staircases. In reality, the hotel floor was moderately sized and largely unremarkable. It did contain some hidden rooms, but they were used for hiding furniture that Holmes bought on credit and did not intend to pay for. The verifiable facts are that Holmes was sentenced to death for only one murder, that of his former accomplice and business partner, Benjamin Pitezel. It is believed that he killed 3 of Benjamin Pitezel's children as well as 3 women he was engaged in sexual relationships with, the child of one of the said mistresses and the sister of another. Unlike most other serial killers, Holmes usually had a rational motive for his series of murders, usually for financial reasons or to prevent his own exposure and punishment. The grisly details along the way are what really elevate this case to the top tier of the annals of American horror. He apparently used a range of methods, including poison, chloroform, gas, and suspected bludgeoning. He hid the bodies pretty cleverly, in cellars and backyards. He constructed elaborate and overly emotional cover stories to dupe his unsuspecting victims. Several of his endeavors were actually financial fraud and misdemeanor crimes. So, as a talented con man and grifter, he himself was able to confuse the details of his exact crimes thoroughly. Historians now say that it was his own talent for tall tales, deception, and duplicity that led to his public reputation as America's first serial killer. On the other hand, he really did use some killing methods known only to medical professionals of the time. So the other title of the torture doctor is perhaps more appropriate for him. Holmes was executed in 1896. Before he died, he succeeded in thoroughly confusing the police, press, and public with wild and contradictory confessions of his own crimes. In some cases, he confessed to the murder of people who were verifiably still alive. At one point, he claimed to be possessed by Satan, which makes about as much sense as anything else that we know about him. Psych profile. Although this case largely predates the introduction of mental health evaluations into the United States criminal justice system, later generations of psychiatrists believe that Holmes may have been almost entirely unique in that he was psychopathic, extremely intelligent, charismatic enough to fool most others, creative in his various MOs, and prolific in his killing strategies. A study from Concordia University, St. Paul, posits that Holmes was a predator who viewed others as a means to his ends. His personality structure resembled that of a true psychopath, a remorseless and narcissistic person who controls others and lies repeatedly. All of this while being glib and charming. Media. There have been multiple books and depictions of Holmes in popular media across the last century. A few of the most famous are the 2006 episode of the U.S. television drama series Supernatural, where the ghost of H.H. Holmes returns to kidnap people. In 2017, the History Channel aired an 8-episode limited docuseries entitled American Ripper, in which Holmes' great-great-grandson, Jeff Mudgett, along with former CIA analyst Amaryllis Fox, investigated Holmes' life to try and prove that Holmes was also the infamous London serial killer Jack the Ripper. And as of 2019, an adaptation of Holmes' life called The Devil in the White City, with Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio attached as executive producers, was said to be in development with Paramount TV and Hulu. This production appears to be on hiatus for now, but may well be revived later according to industry reports. Aileen Lee Carol Wuornos was born February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her father was a convicted child molester who later killed himself in prison. Wuornos' mother abandoned her and her brother when they were young, leaving them with her parents, Wuornos' grandparents, and their children. Wuornos' grandfather beat her, and her grandmother was an alcoholic. Aileen Wuornos became a teenage runaway, a prostitute, a pickpocket, and regular thief from pawn shops. Later on as an adult, her record included, among other felonies and misdemeanors, arrests for illegal possession of a firearm, forgery, assault, and robbery. Her associates and law enforcement personnel would often describe her as erratic and easily angered. Her arrest records frequently noted that her attitude was poor. From late 1989 through late 1990, the bodies of 7 middle-aged white men were discovered in Central Florida. Aileen Wuornos had robbed all of the victims before shooting them to death and stealing their cars. Of all the other serial killers on this list, Aileen Wuornos is verifiably the most consistent, effective, and deadly killer of the group. As far as we know, she never left any survivors. Her victims were all of the same specific age and ethnic grouping and roughly the same area or highway territory. And the MO or modus operandi that she used was so similar in every case that as of today, Wuornos is considered a textbook case of a classic serial killer, repeating her murders with regular and pinpoint accuracy. Her victims included Richard Mallory, who was shot multiple times in the chest, David Spears, who was shot 6 times in the torso, Charles Carskadden, who was shot 9 times in the chest and stomach, Troy Burress, who died of 2 gunshots to the torso, Charles Dick Humphreys, who suffered multiple gunshots to the head and torso, Walter Antonio, who was shot 4 times in the back and head. In an interesting side note, the FBI profiler Robert K. Ressler briefly mentioned Aileen Wuornos in his autobiographical history of his 20 years with the FBI. Writing in 1992, he said he often does not discuss female serial killers because they tend to kill in sprees instead of in a sequential fashion. He said Wuornos was the sole exception known to him at the time. Her methods were successful enough that she might have evaded capture indefinitely if her girlfriend Tyria Moore hadn't snitched on Wuornos to the FBI to avoid her own criminal charges of complicity in the murders. Aileen Wuornos was executed in 2002 in Florida after 12 years of imprisonment on death row. Psych profile. According to the psychopath checklist, Wuornos was found to have a strongly psychopathic personality with a score of 32. The cutoff score for psychopath is 30 out of 40 in the United States. Wuornos was also diagnosed with other issues in prison, and it was officially determined that she had both borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. Media. As America's most famous female serial killer, Wuornos is a celebrity in her own right and was intensively discussed and represented in the media. But her biggest moment in the spotlight came when she was portrayed by the South African origin Hollywood star Charlize Theron in the movie Monster, released in 2003. Wuornos was reportedly disgusted with what she saw as her exploitation by the media without her permission, though she could hardly claim any copyright violation of her crimes against humanity. Theron, on the other hand, went on to win the Oscar for Best Actress for her stellar performance. Dean Corll was born on December 24, 1939, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He was reportedly a loner growing up and was often trapped in conflict between two hostile parents who later went through a contentious divorce. After many years of working hard in the family business, which was a candy company, and including his years in the military where he first realized his own homosexual orientation, Corll's sense of personal relationships grew darker and more disturbed. Between 1970 and 1973, Dean Corll killed a minimum of 28 victims, which is to this day suspected to be a conservative estimate. It is possible that all the bodies could not be found, but according to the available evidence, all of his victims were males, aged 13 to 20, the majority of them in their mid-teens. Most of the victims were abducted from Houston Heights, which was then a low-income neighborhood northwest of downtown Houston. For most abductions, he was assisted by one or both of his teenage accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. Several victims were friends of one or both of Corll's accomplices. Others were individuals with whom Corll had himself become acquainted prior to their abduction and murder. And two other victims, Billy Balch and Gregory Malley-Winkle, were former employees of the Corll Candy Company. Corll's victims were usually lured into either one of the two vehicles that he owned, a Ford Econoline van or a 1969 Chevrolet Corvette that he is known to have purchased. The enticement was usually an offer of a party or a lift, and the victim would be driven to Corll's house. Once there, the youths would be given alcohol or other drugs until they passed out, tricked into donning handcuffs or simply grabbed by force. They were then stripped naked and tied to either Corll's bed or usually a plywood torture board, which was regularly hung on a wall. Once manacled, the victims would be sexually assaulted, beaten, tortured, and sometimes after several days, killed by strangulation or shooting with a .22 caliber pistol. Their bodies were then tied in plastic sheeting and buried in discreet locations nearby. In several instances, Corll forced his victims to either phone or write to their parents with explanations for their absence in an effort to soothe any of the parents' fears for their son's safety. He is also known to have retained keepsakes, usually keys, from his victims. He was often referred to as the Candyman or the Pied Piper due to his connection to his family firm, the Corll Candy Company. He was said to have had a habit of handing out free candy to kids, and later on, this turned out to be horrifyingly similar to his habit of enticing young men with special treats to trust him, right up to the point where they were captured, tortured, and murdered by the Candyman. Dean Corll died in 1973 after a violent dispute and shooting incident after bleeding out from gunshot wounds inflicted by one of his own accomplices, Elmer Wayne Henley. In his case, there were no legal proceedings since his case was discovered post-mortem. All of the details in the police records were revealed by Henley, other accomplices, and the family members of past victims. Corll was so good at concealing his true nature throughout his life that he remains a mysterious figure to this day. Psych profile. Although Dean Corll was never captured alive and never diagnosed with any mental illness or known conditions, some of his actions seem to indicate the characteristics of a dissociative identity disorder. For example, when he was around his family, army friends, or in any other conventional social situation, he appeared normal and well-adjusted, which means he took some effort to conceal the other side of him around them. When he was in his comfort zone, around his right-hand men, meaning his known accomplices and his criminal associates, he could show the crazy and violent side of his personality, and did so frequently and often enough to disturb even other hardened criminals. The Media A 2003 film named Freak Out was loosely inspired by the Houston mass murders committed by Corll. The film was directed by Brad Jones, who also starred as Corll. This film largely focuses upon the last night of Corll's life prior to Henley shooting him and contacting authorities. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker Ricardo Richard Leyva Munoz Ramirez, was born on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas. His father was an abusive alcoholic. His mother and his multiple siblings lived in terror of that abuse and domestic violence. And at an abnormally young age, Richard himself fell under the evil influence of his older cousin, Miguel Mike Ramirez, a decorated combat veteran who nonetheless had an extremely disturbing history as a serial killer and a rapist during his overseas tour of duty in the Vietnam War. Miguel used to show the young Richard Polaroid pictures of the multiple Vietnamese women who were his own targets. These graphic images of war crimes showed the women to be raped, dismembered, and murdered. Richard was fascinated rather than repulsed. Subsequently, his own highly publicized home invasion and murder spree across the greater Los Angeles area and later the San Francisco Bay Area over the course of 14 months featured a wide variety of weapons and different murder methods. These included handguns, various types of knives, a machete, a tire iron, and a claw hammer. Richard Ramirez was known to attack by punching, pistol whipping, and strangling many of his victims, both manually with his hands and in one instance with a ligature. He stomped at least one victim to death in her sleep and tortured another victim by shocking her with a live electrical cord. Ramirez apparently enjoyed degrading and humiliating his victims, especially those who survived his attacks or whom he explicitly decided not to kill, by forcing them to say that they loved Satan or telling them to swear on Satan if they wanted to live. It was during this period of intense terror that he inflicted on California residential communities that he became known as the Night Stalker in the national press. And on August 30th, 1985, Ramirez was recognized by members of the public as El Matador, or literally the killer, due to his prominence in news media reporting. A crowd of people chased him down in the street near Boyle Heights in LA and nearly beat him to death before police arrived. In 1989, Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries, and sentenced to death in California's gas chamber. After filing multiple appeals, Ramirez was transferred for medical treatment of complications secondary to B-cell lymphoma to Marin General Hospital in Greenbury, California. He died there in 2013 without ever expressing any remorse for his actions. Psych profile psychiatrist Michael H. Stone describes Ramirez as a made psychopath as opposed to a born psychopath. This implies that the abuse and bad experiences he was subjected to at an early age and the unstable way he was raised led him to think that certain actions were normal, as that was the only norm he knew of. However, with the loss of his moral compass, Ramirez began to build up his own desire with the patterns of his killing and this new public spotlight he never had before, as he was being portrayed as a terrifying, anonymous celebrity predator actually encouraged him to execute more people as a means of gaining more attention. Media Richard Ramirez has been portrayed many times in the mass media due to the intensely scrutinized nature of his case. There are many movies and documentaries about him, including 2 depictions of him in the FX anthology series American Horror Story, in the 5th and 9th seasons respectively. Most recently, there was a 2021 documentary released by Netflix called Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, which features first-person interviews, archival footage, newly shot reenactments, and original photography related to the case. Case of Matthew Winkler, Secrets of a Religious Family. Sometimes the most horrible and unpredictable crimes are committed in seemingly perfect families. Of course, even in the most prosperous unit of society can come crisis, which will be unnoticed by others, but literally poison the lives of all members of the family and eventually lead to tragedy. The Winklers, in the town of Selmer, were considered by many to be a model family. The young pastor, his wife, and their 3 daughters looked happy, had everything they needed for a comfortable life, were healthy and successful, but in a quiet pool, as they say. In this case, many questions remained unanswered because we heard only one version of what happened, and the story itself became the subject of the book, Sex and Murder, Secrets of a Pastor. March 22, 2006, the small town of Selmer, Tennessee, shook the terrible news. A 31-year-old pastor named Matthew Winkler was brutally murdered in his own home, and his wife Mary and their 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Maria Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, disappeared without a trace. That day, the preacher of the Church of Christ did not show up for the evening service where he was supposed to attend with his family. This circumstance seemed strange and suspicious, because Matthew was always very responsible and could not miss the planned event without informing anyone. None of the family members also answered the phone, which was even more disturbing. Alarmed community members decided to go to the Winklers' residence to find out what had happened and if they needed help. From the outside, the house looked normal. The windows and doors were intact, and nothing suspicious was visible. Inside, There were lights on in several rooms, and they could hear a television playing quite loudly in one of the rooms. It gave the impression that the owners of the house were busy doing their own thing. The front door was locked, but no one answered the knock. Phone calls also went unanswered, and through the curtain windows, it was impossible to see what was going on inside or if anyone was there. However, even though the whole situation was quite strange, no one was in a hurry to call the police. Instead, a call was made to an elder of the religious community who advised them to look for a spare key and open the door themselves. It took another hour and a half, and when members of the community were finally able to get inside the house, they found an eerie scene. Everything in the house was in its place. There was no sign of intruders, but the owners were nowhere to be seen either. Everything seemed normal until the visitors looked into the marital bedroom. There on the floor, in a pool of his own blood, lay the pastor's body. There was a huge hole in his back from a gunshot wound. Blood spattered everywhere, and bloody foam dried on his face. By then, the body had already cooled and stiffened. It was obvious that Matthew had been lying there for many hours and had probably been killed in the morning because he was dressed in his pajamas. It was only after this that a call was made to the police. By the time the police arrived, a whole crowd of neighbors, churchgoers, and casual passersby had gathered in and around the house, interested in what was going on. All of these people had left their fingerprints at the crime scene. They left their fingerprints and shoe prints, erased or trampled possible evidence, greatly complicating the work of investigators. The police took the body for forensic examination and found that the pastor was killed by a single shot in the back, fired from a large caliber weapon. He died a few minutes after the wound, from massive blood loss, unable to call for help. It was simply impossible to establish definitively whether there were any strangers in the house at that time, because the people who had arrived before the police arrived had literally destroyed all traces of them. The picture of the crime was quite strange, and those who could shed any light on what happened disappeared. The fate of the wife and daughters of the murdered man remained unknown. The police assumed that the woman and children could have been kidnapped or also killed. By the way, the family minivan Winklers also disappeared from the garage. A massive search was launched and the state issued a yellow alert. This meant that children were missing and all citizens were asked to be vigilant and assist in the search. But let's break this whole story down from the beginning. Matthew Brian Winkler was born in 1974, November 21st in the picturesque country town of Henderson, Tennessee, and was the youngest of 3 sons of Dan and Diane Winkler. Our hero and his 2 older brothers, James and Daniel, grew up in a rather conservative Christian family. Their parents were very religious and brought up their sons in strictness and obedience. It is worth noting that Matthew became a minister of the church in the 5th generation. His father, great-uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler, and great-great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler, Sr. were all preachers of the gospel at one time. The father, to top it all off, rammed the local preacher's school, and was a man respected and influential in his hometown. In their younger years, the Winkler brothers attended Sunday school and were active in church activities. In addition, Matthew in high school was seriously interested in soccer, and everyone who saw his game on the field noted that he had talent and he could well become an outstanding athlete of world renown. However, later the young man decided to sacrifice a promising sports career in favor of Bible study and church ministry. Since the preaching activity of the head of the family was associated with frequent travel, his wife and children almost always followed him. Because of this, Matthew changed several schools in his childhood, but the active, communicative, and friendly child quickly made friends and gained authority everywhere. When the boy finished school, his family lived in a small city called Austin, located in the state of Texas. Matthew was a creative person, had a powerful charisma, but here are some outstanding achievements in studies could not boast. After graduating from high school, he entered the college Freed-Hardeman and successfully completed it. In parallel, the young man began to try his hand as a pastor under the careful guidance of his father. Matthew was the youth minister of the Central Church of Christ in the city of McMinnville. He was later appointed to the preaching position at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carol Winkler, maiden name Freeman, was born in December 1973 in Geist Township, Tennessee, and was the oldest of 2 daughters to her parents. She was also raised in a deeply religious family with strict rules. The head of the family for many years served as a pastor in the Christian church where the girl attended Sunday school. A few years later, a second daughter was born to the family and named Patricia. Unfortunately, the girl was born prematurely and had a number of serious health problems, including cerebral palsy, encephalitis, epilepsy, and mental retardation. For many years, the parents did not want to put up with the disappointing diagnoses of the child and desperately tried to treat her, agreeing even to experimental therapy. However, it did not bring any particular improvement. Mary tenderly loved her little sister, always treated her with awe and cared for her as best she could. But in 1987, when 10-year-old Patricia was bathing in the bathtub, her older sister was only a minute away to take something from the bathing accessories. And at that very moment, the girl had another epileptic seizure. When Mary returned to the room, her sister was no longer breathing, and all attempts to resuscitate her had come to nothing. For a 13-year-old girl, it was a huge shock and the first loss in her life. She blamed herself for the tragedy and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Teachers who saw the deplorable state of Mary sent her to the school psychologist, working with whom she helped. But her father, learning about what was happening, made a scandal and forbade his daughter to go to these sessions, saying that such problems are discussed only within the family. In fact, the girl never received real moral support from her parents. Mary grew up modest and quite shy. She tried to avoid any conflicts, and after the tragic death of her little sister, she became withdrawn. Since her father did not allow her to seek help from a specialist, the trauma over the years has resulted in serious psychological problems. After the death of Patricia, the parents decided to adopt a little girl named Charlotte, who was from a dysfunctional large family. Soon the couple was also allowed to take custody of Charlotte's 2 brothers and sister, so the family was reunited in their new home. Mary was once again the older sister and took care of the younger children while helping her mother. Matthew and Mary Winkler. Family life. The future spouses met soon after Matthew graduated from high school. The guy was prominent, handsome, athletic, and enjoyed great popularity with the opposite sex. But to spin novels right and left, he did not allow a strict religious upbringing. The young people immediately developed a liking for each other, which quickly grew into love. For both of them, it was the first strong feeling in their lives, and after a couple of months they met each other's parents, and having received their blessing, began to plan a wedding. In April 1994, the lovers got married. When the family had an older daughter, Patricia, the head of the family, was still in college and was forced to leave school for a while. He took a job at a construction site, but long there did not last because he was not used to hard physical labor. During this period, for the first time made himself aware of the difficult character of Matthew. He was often angry with others, irritated at small things, and sometimes he could not control his anger. But Mary tried not to complain and not to tell anyone about what was happening in her family. A meek young woman brought up in the spirit of patriarchy obeyed her husband in everything. At first, the Winklers lived near the house of Mary's parents, so she was able to see them regularly. But soon Mrs. Freeman was diagnosed with cancer, which rapidly progressed, and in just a few months, she literally burned from the disease. It was another shock for Mary, and the care of her underage siblings now fell on her shoulders. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Mary was pregnant again at that time. But soon after the birth of their second daughter, the family moved to another city, where they bought their own small house. After the move, Mary was completely absorbed in the care of the baby and almost stopped communicating with her father, as well as with younger brothers and sisters, who were too demanding and constantly needed attention. In addition, the young mother began to suffer from severe postpartum depression. Everyone who was closely acquainted with the family Winkler noted some oddities in the character and behavior of Mary. The young woman was characterized as an introvert and even sociophobic. She did not communicate with anyone. It was difficult for her to make new acquaintances, much less friendships. She suffered from mood swings, was prone to melancholy, and any little thing could bring her to tears. While Matthew was building his career as a pastor, his wife became increasingly withdrawn. The situation became even more complicated when Mary once again became pregnant, and a few months later, she learned that the fetus had died in her womb. Such news strongly shook Mary, who was looking forward to the appearance of this child and very much dreamed of a large, friendly family. Again, to see the long-awaited 2 stripes on the pregnancy test she could only 2 years later, and her happiness was unbounded. This time, hid her pregnancy for a long time, as if afraid of something. She did so until her situation became obvious. Once again, everyone began to talk about Mary's strange behavior and pathological reticence. The strange behavior of Mrs. Winkler was associated not only with a severe psychological trauma she suffered in childhood, but also with a very unhealthy environment within her own family, which only undermined her already unstable nervous system. The head of the family was a man of authority and demanded unconditional obedience. Despite the fact that in public the Winklers looked like an ideal married couple, where there was trust, mutual respect, and harmony, in reality, their neighbors have repeatedly heard how the husband shouted and snapped at his wife for no apparent reason. No one could even imagine that a respected pastor could raise a hand on his wife until one day Mary had a huge black eye. Despite the fact that she denied the fact of domestic violence and said that it was an accident, the city quickly spread rumors about the cruelty of a young preacher who beats the mother of his children. In addition, Matthew at some point developed an irresistible urge to experiment in bed. He offered his wife to diversify their intimate life with role-playing games, adult toys, and so on. But for Mary, brought up in strictness with conservative views, such was unacceptable. She strongly restricted her husband in this, which infuriated him, and he repeatedly tried to get what he wanted by force. One day, after another abuse in bed, Mary called her only close friend in tears and complained to her about the situation. The friend, who promised to keep her secret, immediately blabbed about everything, which provoked a new wave of rumors and gossip about the unacceptable behavior of the clergyman. At that time, Matthew was up for promotion and aspired to be a local church leader, but he was rejected because of rapidly spreading unpleasant rumors about him. Moreover, he was also removed from his position in the Sunday school, where he had brought God's word to the children and was in good standing. This was requested by the parents, who had also heard about the pastor's peculiar predilections. All this forced the family to leave their residence and move to another city where they planned to start over. They settled in Selmer, where they quickly gained the love and respect of those around them. Matthew took a job as a church pastor again, and his wife found a part-time job to make a small contribution to the family income. And although the family was still not smooth, their neighbors, as well as the congregation of the church where Matthew preached, considered Mary and Matthew an ideal couple and their family a model. Next door to the Winkler family lived a young married couple with whom the couple quickly became friends. They often visited each other, celebrated holidays together, shared news and secrets. A few months before the tragedy, during a joint dinner at the pastor's house, bragged to the neighbors that her husband had bought her a gun for self-defense and had already taken her to the shooting range several times to learn how to handle it confidently. Mary turned out to be quite a capable student, quickly mastered all the subtleties and accurately shot at targets. Moreover, it turned out that the Winklers already had firearms in the house, which had been purchased by the pastor earlier, also for self-defense. The guests wondered why the pastor and his wife needed all this, because they live in a quiet town where they have no enemies, and everyone around them loves and respects their family. After another move of the couple, their financial situation left much to be desired. Mary was in search of various part-time jobs, and she also decided to get a medical degree to get a job in a clinic and help sick children. Soon, Mary decided to improve the financial condition of their family through financial fraud. She herself later claimed that she did not realize that she was doing something illegal and was going to pay back all the money as soon as she got back on her feet. What Mary was doing is commonly referred to as artificially inflating account balances. Mrs. Winkler also received checks from unspecified sources and then deposited them into a bank account she and her husband owned. She then changed the address of the account so that all communications would be routed there. The total amount of checks she received was almost $17,000, which aroused certain suspicions of the bank employees who decided to invite the couple to the office branch to clarify the circumstances and resolve the situation. But the pastor and his wife never showed up at the bank, and this aroused even more suspicion. It was assumed that Matthew was not aware of what his wife was doing at all. However, after Matthew's death, his wife tried to prove in court that the whole story of fraud was his idea, and that it was he who forced her to make dubious transactions, while he himself remained in the shadows without arousing suspicion. Where has Mary disappeared to? When Mr. Winkler was found murdered in his own home, his wife and daughters were put on the wanted list, fearing that they too might be in mortal danger. Initially, the meek, shy, and homely Mary was initially viewed solely as a possible victim of the crime. However, after talking to neighbors and receiving information from the bank about financial fraud, she became the main suspect in the murder of her own husband. It was necessary to find out as soon as possible where Mary had disappeared to, where the children were, and if they were all right. They, as well as their family car, were put on the wanted list. Attempts were also made to trace transactions made from Mary's bank card and to locate her location through her cell phone signal. Mary was found just a day later in an Alabama resort town where she and her children were having fun at a local amusement park. It was as if the mother wanted to give her children one last party, realizing that she would soon be going to prison and would see her girls very soon. When the family was taken to the police station to testify, the two older daughters confidently told the same story. According to them, intruders broke into the house and injured their dad, and their mom picked up a gun to protect them. They were then forced to run for their lives. According to the girls, their father was alive and in the hospital, and they were soon to go and see him and return home. What exactly happened in the house, as it turned out, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not see, and learned about the events from the words of their mother. They only heard a gunshot and glimpsed their father lying on the floor, and then their mother put them in the car and they drove away. Mary almost immediately began to confess, but she claimed that she could not reconstruct the entire chain of events of that day, referring to the temporary blur. According to her, her spouse had abused her for years, humiliating her and inducing her to forms of intimacy that were unacceptable to her. Mary insisted that it was he who had initiated the financial scam she had perpetrated. Matthew demanded total obedience, easily lost his temper, and once gave the will of his fists. This was confirmed by Matthew's secretary at his previous place of employment. The woman repeatedly witnessed how the pastor insulted his wife, who carefully brought him lunch to church, but he was always dissatisfied with something. The evening before the tragedy, there was another scandal in the family, because of which the spouses went to bed in separate rooms. Mary cried all night, and in the morning she did not realize how in her hands was a shotgun, which her husband kept loaded. She entered Matthew's room and shot him in the back while he was still lying in bed. Matthew collapsed to the floor, bloody foam oozing from his mouth and nose. According to Mary, her husband, while still alive, whispered, "Why?" To which she replied, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Mary then took her daughters and left the house, and her husband, as experts have established, tried to reach for the phone to call for help, but he no longer had the strength to do so. By the way, the weapon of crime was found in the trunk of the car on which Mary left with the children. For what purpose she took it with her, Mrs. Winkler also could not answer. At the trial, the role-playing costumes found in their home were presented as evidence of the pastor's humiliation and moral abuse of his wife. Upon seeing them, Mary turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite the fact that she confused her testimony and told several different versions of what happened, the court agreed that she was the victim of a domestic tyrant, and the murder was the result of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, this did not absolve Mary of responsibility for what she had done. In April 2007, the court delivered its final verdict in this complicated and confusing case. Mrs. Winkler was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but her mental state raised many questions. It was originally expected that the young woman would be sent to prison for at least 6 years, but in the end, she was given a sentence of less than 1 year. She spent 2 months of that sentence in a psychiatric hospital where experts were trying to determine whether she could regain custody of her children upon release. In the summer of 2008, Mary was given sole custody of her daughters, who all this time lived with their paternal grandparents. Matthew's parents were extremely upset by this circumstance. They believed that their daughter-in-law had deliberately killed their son and suffered virtually no punishment for it, and now their granddaughters were given full custody of her. However, all their numerous attempts to file appeals had failed. As for the fraud case, it never went to trial. The bank never filed formal charges, and the whole story was dropped. Baby Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. 92 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, August 4, 1892. The Borden family's maid, Bridget Sullivan, nicknamed Maggie, relaxed on her bed on a sunny day after washing the outer windows. When the clock ticked 11, she heard the city hall bell sound. The Borden daughter suddenly broke the hush. "Come down, Maggie. Come down quickly. Father is dead. Someone killed him inside." Maggie called the police. Andrew Borden's body was hacked almost beyond recognition. When the police arrived, they covered his body. Then they searched downstairs for evidence of an intruder. By that time, Adelaide Churchill, a neighbor who had come to comfort the Borden daughters, made a gruesome discovery on the second floor of the Borden home. It was the body of Abby Borden, Borden's daughter's stepmother. Investigators discovered Abby's corpse cold, but Andrew's was found warm, implying that Abby was slain at least 90 minutes before her husband. The Fall River Herald revealed that news of the Borden homicides under the headline "Shocking Crime," a venerable citizen and his aged wife hacked to pieces in their home. It spread like wildfire, and hundreds started pouring into 2nd Street, where for years Andrew J. Borden and his wife had lived in happiness. A Herald reporter who went to the crime scene described the deceased man's face as a wound 6 by 4 inches broad, had been created across the left temple as if it had been pounded with the dull point of an axe. The left eye had been pulled out and the nose had been trimmed to length. The man's clothes were drenched in blood and his face had been cut to pieces. Despite the gore, the room was in order and there were no traces of any altercation. According to the Fall River Herald, initial conjecture focused on a Portuguese laborer who had visited the Borden residence earlier in the morning and requested the wages owed him. Medical evidence revealed that Abby Borden was killed by a big guy who attacked the victim from behind. 2 days after the killings, newspapers began presenting evidence that Lizzie Borden, the younger than 33, was involved in her parents' Eli Benson employee at S.R. Smith's medicine shop in Fall River informed authorities that Lizzie went to the store the day before the murder and tried to buy prussic acid, a lethal poison. It seemed that Lizzie and her stepmother never got along amicably. Although family members said ties between the two women were regular, they had not spoken for a considerable time back. Meanwhile, people saw Lizzie as innocent. From the majority of opinion, it may be said, in Lizzie Borden's life, there is neither a single unmaidenly nor a single purposefully nasty conduct. However, the lack of blood elsewhere except on the corpses of the victims and the police's inability to find any precise murder weapon led them to believe that someone within the Borden home perpetrated the killings. Moreover, since Lizzie's elder sister Emma was out of the house at the massacre, suspicion began to fall on her. Investigators wondered why Lizzie knew so little about her mother's whereabouts. They also considered Lizzie's claim that she was out in the rear barn searching for irons for a plant fishing trip, while implausible Andrew Borden was slain in the main room. The dusty floor of the barn loft where she claimed to have searched revealed no tracks, and the suffocating heat in the attic seemed unlikely to tempt anybody to spend more than few minutes looking for equipment that would not be used for days. Theories concerning a tile mail invader were questioned. One renowned physician stated that hacking is practically a sure evidence of a deed by a woman who is oblivious of what she is doing. In the courtroom above police headquarters on August 9th, an inquest into the Borden killings was convened. District Attorney Jose Anulton questioned Lizzie Borden, Bridget Sullivan, home visitor John Morse and others before criminal magistrate Josiah Blaisdell. Lizzie offered unclear and inconsistent responses during her 4-hour assessment. The hearing was delayed 2 days later, and Police Chief Hilliard arrested Lizzie Borden. Lizzie pleaded not guilty to the allegations of murder the next day and was carried by rail car to the Taunton prison, 8 miles north of Fall River. Lizzie returned to a Fall River courthouse on August 22nd for her preliminary hearing. Judge Josiah Blaisdell ruled her probably guilty and ordered her to face a grand jury and possible charges for her parents. The grand jury convened in November. The jury reconvened after initially declining to deliver an indictment and hearing additional testimony from Alice Russell, a family acquaintance who remained with the two Borden sisters in the killings. Russell told grand jurors that she saw Lizzie Borden burn a blue garment in a kitchen fire because it was mirrored with old paint, as Lizzie described. The evidence, together with prior testimony from Bridget Sullivan, that Lizzie was wearing a blue dress on the morning of the killings, persuaded grand jurors to prosecute Lizzie for her parents. Russell's evidence also convinced the sisters to cut all relations with their old buddy. Lizzie Borden's trial began on June 5, 1893, at the New Bedford courthouse before a three-judge panel, a robust defense team, including former Massachusetts Governor George Robinson and Andrew Jennings, represented the defendant, while District Attorney Knowlton and Thomas Moody argued the case for the prosecution. Moody presented the state's case before a jury of 12 men. This cause of Andrew and Abby Borden were discovered when Moody inadvertently put Lizzie's blue gown on the prosecution table during his speech. According to a few sources, seeing her parents' calls sent Lizzie into a frenzy that lasted for many minutes, sending a rush of excitement through awestruck viewers and prompting actual irritation and discomfort to pierce the ranks of counsel. Lizzie sat behind the fan for most of Moody's 2-hour address, watching as the prosecution presented Lizzie as the only person with both the motivation and opportunity to commit the double murders, and then show the head of the axe that Lizzie used to murder her parents. The state's first witnesses testified about the events in and around the Borden residence on August 4, 1892. The most significant of these witnesses, 26-year-old Sullivan, testified that Lizzie was the only person she saw in the house when her parents were murdered. However, she gave the defense some solace when she said she had not seen any signs of Lizzie's rumored ugly relationship with her stepmother during her over 2 years of service to the family. She stated, "Everything was lovely. Lizzie and her mother were often talking." Other prosecution witnesses backed Sullivan's claim that Lizzie and her stepmother were getting along nicely. Sullivan also testified that Andrew and Abby Borden had stomach aches the day before the murder. Lizzie stated she was cleaning exterior windows during Abby's death. After Andrew Borden arrived home from his trip around town, Sullivan testified that she unlocked the door for him and then heard Lizzie's call for aid a few minutes after 11 o'clock. Several witnesses claimed to have seen Andrew Borden in the 2 hours leading up to his murder in various locations throughout town. On the morning of the killings, household visitor John Morse, 60, recounted eating breakfast in the Borden residence and then going to do chores. The following witnesses reported the events and conversations after the killings were discovered. Dr. C. Barry Bowen, the Borden family physician, related Lizzie's narrative about hunting for lead sinkers in the barn, and her belief that her father's problems with his tenants had anything to do with the killings. On cross-examination, C. Barry agreed with the defense that the morphine he administered for Lizzie may have contributed to some of her confusing and conflicting evidence at the inquest after the killings. Another significant witness, Adlai Churchill, recalls Lizzie wearing a bright blue dress with a diamond motif on her, but she didn't recall seeing any blood marks. Fall River assistant Marshal John Fleet remembers speaking with Lizzie immediately after the killings. When he named Abby Borden her mother, Lizzie corrected him. Lizzie said, "She was not my mother, sir. She was my stepmother. My mother died when I was a youngster." Alice Russell's testimony was once again the most powerful. Lizzie visited Russell the night before the murders, announcing that she would soon be leaving on vacation and feeling that something is hanging over me. "I can't tell what it is. I feel worried something will happen," Lizzie sent to Russell after detailing her parents' severe stomach sickness, which she attributed to awful baker's bread. She wanted to go to sleep with one eye open half the time, for fear that someone may burn the home down or harm her father since he was so discourteous to others. Lizzie said to Russell, District Attorney Moody moved on to the Sunday after the killings and quizzed Russell about the clothing burning incident. "I will burn this old thing up. It's covered with paint," Lizzie said to Russell when she asked what she would do with the blue outfit. During cross-examination, defense counsel George Robinson tried to imply that a guilty person attempting to remove damning evidence would not do it in such a public manner as Lizzie supposedly did. To Lizzie's testimony, Russell also mentioned a talk with Lizzie regarding a message she got from a messenger on the morning of the murders, summoning her to visit a sick acquaintance. Lizzie used the message to explain why she assumed her mother had left the house and didn't think to seek her when she found her father dead. The claimed message was never discovered after a thorough search of the Borden residence. According to Russell, she jokingly indicated to Lizzie that her mother may have destroyed the message. Yes, she must have, Lizzie said, according to Russell. Robinson's performance pleased reporters, with one remarking that the ex-governor is absolutely without rival as a cross-examiner in New York City. According to one trial reporter, Robinson appeared ready to turn more or less to his account practically every government witness. The defense relied heavily on the testimony of the state's witnesses. There has never been a trial with such spectacular inconsistencies offered by witnesses. Summoned for a single goal, wrote one writer covering the trial. The defense kept hammering on the prosecution's main witnesses' inconsistent testimony. The defense also questioned the prosecution's case. Where is the handle that allegedly broke off from the axe head that the state brought into court and claimed was part of the murder weapon? The government had no response. The defense also took advantage of the government's timeline, which allowed between 8 and 13 minutes between Andrew Borden's murder and Lizzie's call to Bridget Sullivan. Robinson attempted to portray the difficulty of washing blood of one's person, clothes, and murder weapon, then hiding the murder weapon, all within that short time frame. The three-judge panel ruling that Lizzie Borden's inquest testimony, which was riddled with inconsistencies and unconvincing assertions, could not be brought into evidence by the prosecution might have been the turning point in the trial. The courts found that Lizzie was effectively a prisoner accused of 2 murders at the coroner's inquiry. Her testimony at the inquest, given in the absence of her attorney, was not voluntary. The judges stated Lizzie should have been informed that she had the right to stay quiet under the Fifth Amendment. The justices dismissed the state's position that Lizzie was merely a suspect at the inquest, not a prisoner. Her statement should be included since it was more like denial than a confession. After a decisive setback, the prosecution arrested its case on June 14th. The prosecution wanted drugged Eli Benz to tell the jury about Lizzie Borden going to a Fall River drugstore the day before the murders and asking for 10 cents worth of prussic acid, a poison. The state attempted to prove the characteristics, properties, and applications of prussic acid through medical experts, drugists, furriers, and chemists with a jury, but it was dismissed. Each departed the courtroom with a palm leaf fan and cold water. After hearing the state's basic argument, the judges decided that the evidence should be omitted. The defense offered only a few witnesses. The night before the killings, Charles Gifford and Uriah Kirby saw a strange figure near the Borden residence at 11 o'clock. Dr. Benjamin Hanvey testified that at 10:30 a.m. on August 4th, he spotted a pale-faced young guy on the sidewalk near 92nd Street. A plumber and a gas fitter testified that they were in the Borden's barn loft a day or two before the killings, throwing doubt on police claims that Lizzie's alibi was questionable since the loft's dust seemed undisturbed. The defense's most anticipated witness was Lizzie's elder sister, Emma Borden. Lizzie and her father, according to Emma, had an excellent connection. She informed jurors that the gold ring found on Andrew Borden's little finger was given to him by Lizzie 10 or 15 years ago and that he treasured it, even as she acknowledged residual bitterness over her father's transfer of a Fall River home, which Emma referred to as grandfather's house. To Abby and her sister, Emma asserted that Lizzie and her stepmother had good ties. The defense thought Emma would testify that the Bordens had a habit of burning leftovers and bits of clothing, but the court deemed the testimony inadmissible. A.V. Jennings, arguing for the defense, said, "From beginning to finish, there is not a single shred of direct evidence against Lizzie A. Borden. There isn't a single drop of blood, and there isn't a single weapon they have linked to her." Governor Robinson, who spoke after Jennings, maintained that the crime had to have been done by a crazy or a demon, not by someone with his client's good background. He claimed that the state had failed to fulfill its burden of demonstrating guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Furthermore, it was physically impossible for Lizzie to have done the crime within the timetable provided by the prosecution without the assistance of a Confederate. Robinson dismissed the argument that Lizzie killed her parents while stark nude to avoid having blood marks on her clothes, claiming that the killings may have been done by an intruder who slipped out of the home observed. Justice Dewey charged the jury after Josiah Knowlton's able summary of the prosecution's evidence. According to one media article, if the judge had been the senior counsel for the defense, delivering the closing plea on behalf of the prisoner, he could not have more empathically laid out the foolishness of relying on circumstantial evidence alone. The newspaper said it was a remarkable charge, a plea for the innocent. According to Justice Dewey, jurors should consider Lizzie's extraordinary Christian character, which entitled her to every inference in her favor. Before arriving at her judgment, the jury deliberated for an hour and a half. "What is your verdict?" the clerk inquired of the jury foreman. The foreman said, "Not guilty." Lizzie screamed out of a joyful shriek, dropped into her chair, leaned her hands on the courthouse rail, buried her face in her hands, and let out a second joyous roar. Emma, her attorney, and the entire audience rushed to congratulate Lizzie. She said, hiding her face in her sister's arms, "Take me home now. I want to go back to the old location tonight." The jury's decision was largely applauded. Regardless, no matter how plausible it is that Lizzie murdered her parents, the prosecution failed to fulfill its burden of proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The state's case was primarily based on the assertion that no one else could have committed the crime. That, along with a few other dubious behaviors on Lizzie's part, such as burning her clothes, was not enough for the board and jury to condemn her. Some assumed that if the defendant had been a man, the jury would have been more willing to convict. One of the defense's most potent arguments was that most people in 1893 couldn't believe a lady with Lizzie's upbringing could have committed such heinous murders. Lizzie Borden moved to Fall River after the trial when she and her sister Emma bought Maplecroft, a beautiful property on the hill. Lizzie became interested in theater. She attended many performances and socialized with performers, painters, and bohemian types. In 1905, Emma moved out of Maplecroft. Lizzie remained at Maplecroft until her death in 1927 at 67. In Fall River's Oak Grove Cemetery, she was laid to rest beside her parents' graves. Within 9 days of Lizzie's death, her sister Emma died. With the lack of evidence, people and the state hoped that the 1890 case of Lizzie Borden would never get solved. Isn't the dark side of the unsolved 1890 case chilling? So let us look into another mystery. Greenbrier is a small town in Arkansas-Faulkner County. It's the internationally known Riddle's Elephant and Wildlife Sanctuary. Greenbrier is often regarded as Arkansas's safest city. Greenbrier is currently a delightful and secure neighborhood. However, not in the 1980s and 1990s. Then the community of Greenbrier grew out of a bit of a brothel. It was where the world met Pamela Fae Falcons. 32-year-old Pamela Fae Falcons was a mother of two and a working clerk at Crossroads Video Store in Greenbrier, Arkansas. The night of February 2nd, 1990 was chilly and wet. Pam was working at the Crossroads Video Store at the time. Her husband David Falcons was meant to pick her up from work. David arrived and saw that Pam wasn't there when he came soon before the 9 p.m. closing hour. An ashtray with a lit cigarette and a hot cup of coffee sat on the counter seemed unusual to David. The cash register was still ringing. Pam's pocketbook, keys, and coat were all in the store, but she had vanished. David reported her missing. A search team was dispatched to find her immediately after getting David's statement. Officials and volunteers searched for the 32-year-old mother of two until lousy weather made the search difficult. The search resumed in the morning and continued throughout the afternoon. Then two of Pam's relatives discovered a terrible find 2 miles south of McGinty Town on Clinton Mountain Road. Within a flash of the moment, after the horrific discovery, her relatives wished to go and rewind the days with Pam. Yes, Pam's dead body was discovered at an old rubbish dump location. She had multiple cuts on her legs and had been battered with a blunt weapon around the head and shoulders, with the blow to the skull being the fatal injury, and a DNA sample was taken from her sperm. Faulkner County Sheriff's investigator Marty Montgomery, who went to school with Pam, was one of the initial investigators on the case. He also went on to serve as sheriff for 5 terms. Marty thought at least finding the inhumane animal could find some peace for Pam's kids and family. So he started to collect witnesses of the men who assaulted Pam. A young couple leaving the business just as the intruder entered it at 8:40 p.m. came the closest to becoming witnesses. The couple added that he was a tall, stocky Caucasian man in his 30s or 40s with a tattoo, other distinctive feature, on his left arm. Around the time of the kidnapping, someone eating at the Wagon Wheel restaurant next door to the video shop reported seeing a car there. A light blue Chevrolet with a white panel and a white camper shell was mentioned. Everyone within a 100-mile radius was looking for the vehicle, but it never showed up. Instead, they found that rape was allegedly committed at an abandoned mobile home on Heath Lane in Greenbrier. Montgomery said that they had received various intelligence reports from many sources. Alibis and polygraph testing cleared the persons who were brought in for interrogation. Other prospective witnesses were interrogated and physical evidence was analyzed. However, the probe soon came to a halt. According to Bob Blankenship, then sheriff of Faulkner County, the inquiry might take long unless investigators find a smoking gun. There have never been more actual words stated. Before DNA identified the culprit, Faulkner County elected 5 additional sheriffs. But only after 18 long years, with the flourishing DNA technologies, forensic genealogists could search ancestral databases for matches to DNA samples recovered at crime scenes. In October 2018, Faulkner County Sheriff Tim Riles announced at a news conference that they were able to use DNA genealogy with a 99% accuracy to discover the owner of the DNA acquired from Pam. Using unknown DNA, a family tree construction approach was utilized to identify Edward Keith Reniger. Investigators also retrieved DNA from the murderer's biological daughter, which revealed a 99% match. Our culprit has a history of sexually assaulting women and was sentenced to 10 months in jail in 1994 for kidnapping a Cleburne County lady at knife point who managed to flee. He relocated to Utah, where he resided with his father after his release in May 1995. He, a former truck driver, passed away in 2002 from cancer. He has been aggressive toward his 2 ex-wives. According to his daughter, he was the subject of a restraining order. The murderer's daughter confirmed that he was living in Greenbrier when the Falcons were murdered. He'd been a frequent visitor to the video store, but her daughter didn't recognize him, and neither did her friends or family. According to Solomon Graves, Public Information Officer and Legislative Liaison for the Arkansas Department of Corrections, the intruder has a surgical scar on his left forearm, but it was not what the couple witnessed at the video shop. Officials haven't closed the investigation yet, and they've been cautious with their language, referring to Reniger as the principal suspect in the case, rather than the murderer. They'd prefer more supporting evidence, such as a murder weapon or something Pam had to wound up in Reniger's belongings. Investigator Kent Hill wasn't able to remark on whether Reniger had an accomplice. Falcons was under 100 pounds and stood 5 feet tall. Reniger was 6 feet 4 inches, so he could have easily up-muscled her. But it doesn't rule out the possibility of a co-conspirator. Other concerns and perceptions persist. What had Reniger been up to throughout his years as a free man? Was Pam Falcons the only one who died? Or did Reniger get framed up? Is there anyone who knows how to fit all of the puzzle parts together? Reniger worked at Verco Manufacturing in Conway from 1988 to 1990 or 1991, and Sheriff Friles requested a public's aid in knowing more about him. After being released from prison, he went to welding school at the Spartan College of Aeronautics and Technology in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Investigators Kent Hill and Johnny Fowlkes are waiting for anyone who may have known Reniger or have information regarding his personal life, or those he was affiliated with. But he seems to have no friends, and also even his ex and wives are not aware in depth of his past. Reniger is the primary suspect, but they don't have enough pieces of evidence to prove that he is the murderer. It's been 32 long years, there is not even a lead, and nobody had ever claimed they knew Reniger except his family, who are unaware of his darkest side. Case of Anna Walsh, a horrific event in the basement of a family home. For over a year now, an investigation has been ongoing into the mysterious disappearance of a young woman and mother of 3 children, Anna Walsh. In January of the previous year, the case was reclassified as a brutal crime, although the body of the missing 39-year-old American woman of Serbian descent has yet to be found to this day. Her husband, Brian Walsh, who had previously encountered legal issues for fraud, was arrested on charges related to her disappearance. No one could have imagined that this individual could be responsible for ending the life of the mother of his sons. It's noteworthy that the Walsh family appeared to be quite prosperous, successful, and happy on the surface. Moreover, the couple was not in want, living in a luxurious home, and could afford anything they desired. However, few were aware of what happened behind the closed doors of this large and beautiful house. Even the person closest to Anna, her mother, did not realize the deadly danger her daughter was in. Interestingly, Brian managed to woo Anna away from her previous husband years ago in a rather unique manner. So unique, in fact, that the woman and her first husband even sought police protection from harassment and threats. Nevertheless, she eventually left with Walsh, to whom she was married for over 7 years. But what happened that led the family head to decide to rid himself of his wife? And what did he do to her? Who was Anna Walsh? Anna Lebasic, who later became known as Anna O'Neill following her first marriage, was born on April 18, 1983, in the Serbian capital of Belgrade. Here, she spent her formative years growing up with her younger sister and a cultured family. Her academic journey led her to the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, where she excelled as one of its standout students. Pursuing higher education, Anna attended the esteemed Belgrade Research University, the most historic and expansive university in Serbia. Her academic pursuits included a deep dive into foreign languages, culminating in a master's degree in French language and literature. At 22, with her diploma in hand, sought broader horizons and career prospects in the United States, a move fully supported by her family. In 2005, she embarked on her American dream. Settling in the U.S., Anna aimed to further her education in hospitality management. She took on administrative roles at prestigious hotels, notably the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia, a part of the elite Relay and Chateau Hotel circle. Anna's warmth, approachability, and sense of duty saw her swiftly ascend the professional ladder, garnering respect from her peers and supervisors alike. Multilingual and adept at resolving conflict, her innate charm and charisma allowed her to form connections with ease. Beloved by colleagues and blessed with a burgeoning circle of friends, Anna seized every chance to shine. She became a U.S. retaining her Serbian nationality, enjoyed a high income, and invested in her own property and car. Her travels broadened her horizons further, and her career flourished, leading to a promotion to senior manager. Anna's intelligence, beauty, slender frame, and radiant smile attracted many admirers. During her tenure at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, she found love with Marcus O'Neill, the establishment's head chef. Their romance led to marriage in 2009, and Anna adopted her husband's last name. Who is Brian Walsh? Brian Paul Walsh was born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, into a well-known, affluent, and respected family. His father, Thomas Walsh, was a distinguished neurologist who worked at one of the state's leading hospitals where he headed a department and also taught at a prestigious medical university. From a young age, Brian was the quintessential spoiled child, luxuriating in wealth and never knowing the word no. He attended one of the best private schools, wore expensive branded clothing, and lived a life of ease. Despite his parents' efforts to provide him with the best education after finishing school, he failed to stay enrolled in any of the 3 prestigious colleges his father had arranged for him to attend. Nevertheless, Brian was far from foolish. His peers remembered him as cunning, calculating, and quite aggressive. He always found a way to get what he wanted one way or another. Brian was known for his extraordinary, even obsessive desire for money and a luxurious lifestyle, and he was extremely reluctant to part with his funds. In his youth, he often borrowed money from friends, only to never return it. During his college years, he would invite friends to the most luxurious restaurants, then through various schemes and manipulations, ensure that others always paid his share of the bill. For many years, Brian was estranged from his father, up until the elder Walsh's death in 2018. The rift in their relationship began after the ungrateful son fraudulently withdrew nearly $1 million from Dr. Thomas Walsh's personal account and simply disappeared with the money. The father did not report his son to the police, and even tried to persuade him to return the money voluntarily. When Brian refused, Thomas ceased all communication with him. By the time of this egregious theft incident, Brian's parents had long been divorced, and his father had another family and decided to permanently erase his eldest heir from his life and his will. However, when Thomas passed away, Brian immediately made his presence known and even filed a lawsuit claiming that the will left behind was forged by the doctor's widow and younger children to cheat him out of his rightful inheritance. Naturally, he was unable to prove anything or receive any part of the estate. Moreover, those who knew Brian described him as greedy, malevolent, and quite cruel, with a tendency towards violence and an inability to control his emotions. He achieved everything by force and during bouts of anger became dangerous. According to some reports, in the late 2000s, Walsh underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic where he attempted to curb his bursts of rage, and it was then that he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy, a truly peculiar love story. The future spouses met in 2014, a time when Anna was working as a senior reservation manager at the Wheatley Hotel in Massachusetts. At that moment, she was married to Marcus O'Neill, who was employed there as well. Brian was among the hotel's guests, and he was immediately taken by the attractive young woman. The fact that Anna was already married did not deter Walsh in the slightest. He began to show her attention that grew increasingly insistent. Accustomed to getting his way from a young age and not one to accept refusal, he began to pursue Anna relentlessly. He managed to obtain her phone number and even her home address, where she lived with her husband, turning their lives into an absolute nightmare. In 2015, the O'Neills found themselves compelled to ask the police for protection against Brian's incessant harassment, which persisted day and night. He constantly sought out Anna, called her at work, sent messages to her personal phone, and demanded she divorce her husband to be with him. The situation escalated when Walsh threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she did not leave with him. What happened next remains unclear, including why Anna eventually changed her mind. However, a year after seeking police protection from Walsh, she unexpectedly divorced her husband. Moreover, a few months later, Brian became her second officially wedded husband. The newlyweds settled in a luxurious home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, located about 20 miles southeast of Boston in an upscale and well-appointed neighborhood. In this marriage, they welcomed 3 sons in quick succession. The boys were born a couple of years apart, and at the time of their mother's disappearance, they were 6, 4, and 2 years old. Anna did not consider taking maternity leave and successfully juggled work with motherhood, continuing her upward career trajectory. She assumed the position of regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate company, where she earned a high salary and effectively became the primary breadwinner for the family. As her job frequently took her to Washington, D.C., she also purchased another home there, registered in her name, where she stayed during business trips. During these times, she relied on visiting nannies to help care for her children. The fraud case against Brian Walsh. What was the head of this large family doing while his wife was both expanding their family and building her career? Brian was unemployed. The $1 million he had once taken from his father was dwindling, and everything his wife acquired was wisely registered in her name. Brian was actively seeking effortless income sources. Before marrying Anna, Brian had spent some time in South Korea, where he befriended a very wealthy individual whose family owned an impressive art collection. Upon returning to the United States, Walsh maintained this connection, and his friend unexpectedly asked for his help in selling several paintings by the iconic artist Andy Warhol. Brian eagerly agreed, but decided not just to sell the artworks for a commission, but to truly profit from the transaction. He had access to a series of abstract paintings by the great artist, collectively titled Shadows. He appraised each painting, obtained the necessary documentation, including authenticity certificates, and then decided to create copies of both the images and the accompanying documents. Walsh approached artists who made precise replicas of the paintings. He convinced the artists that he needed these copies as a backup, since each of the original works was worth about $250,000. For several years, the fraudster successfully copied and sold fake paintings as originals to collectors from various countries, until one of his buyers, an art expert specializing in Andy Warhol's work, quickly identified a forgery and sued the fraudster. The FBI took on the investigation, and in April 2021, the suspect pleaded guilty to selling counterfeit art. He was placed under house arrest after his lawyer negotiated a deal requiring him to return the proceeds from the sale of the paintings to the buyers to avoid actual prison time. Brian's movements were significantly restricted, but he was allowed to leave his house. Twice a day, he could drive his children to and from their educational institutions. Additionally, he had 2.5 hours in the morning to visit stores, pharmacies, dry cleaners, and a few other places in his area to purchase necessities. The list of these places was limited and approved in an official document. The mysterious disappearance of Mrs. Walsh. On December 31st, 2022, the Walsh family was preparing to ring in the new year together in the comfort of their home. Present were just the spouses and their 3 sons. Due to their young ages, the boys went to bed early, leaving Anna and Brian at the dinner table. That day, Anna made her last post on social media, extending her greetings and noting ambiguously that the year had been challenging. But she and her husband remained united. Anna was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd, but on January 4th, her employer, Tishman Speyer, reported her missing to the police. She had failed to show up for work, missed closing a crucial deal, and her phone had been unreachable for several days. Independently of Speyer's actions, her husband also reported her missing, expressing his concern that he had been unable to contact her for several days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st. He claimed she woke him up early in the morning, saying that there were some issues at work, and her boss had requested her to come in earlier than planned. After that, Mr. Walsh believed his wife headed to the airport with just a few belongings. However, inconsistencies in the case soon emerged. Firstly, Anna hadn't purchased, changed, or reserved a flight ticket for January 1st, nor had she canceled her flight scheduled for January 3rd. Secondly, she didn't appear at the airport on either January 1st or 3. Thirdly, how did she leave the house? Her personal car was still in the garage, and she hadn't called for a taxi. Brian suggested she might have hitchhiked, but this theory sounded far from convincing. Brian's statements and behavior raised many questions. His accounts were inconsistent, and he didn't seem particularly troubled by the unfolding events. Unable to contact the mother of his children for more than 3 days, he only reported her missing on the 4th day and only after her workplace called. Investigation and arrest of the suspect. From the outset, Mr. Walsh was considered a primary suspect, yet law enforcement lacked sufficient grounds for his arrest or a warrant to search their family home. They conducted only a cursory inspection with the homeowner's permission, which yielded nothing. Brian claimed he had been living a normal life during those 3 days, visiting usual stores and tending to household chores. However, verifying his claims proved difficult. Whenever he left the house, he forgot his phone, which according to him, was often taken without permission by his older children to play games. On January 5th, the police made a public appeal through television, displaying a photo of Anna and requesting anyone with information about her whereabouts or fate to immediately contact law enforcement. Yet no witnesses came forward. The last time Anna was known to have made calls was to her mother and sister on December 31st, making her husband the last known person to have seen her. Surveillance camera footage from the neighborhood provided no leads. Anna was not captured on any cameras on the morning of January 1st, as if she had never left her home. On the contrary, her husband was recorded leaving and returning several times, but it was impossible to determine his destinations. Walsh's claim of a supermarket visit was debunked. His vehicle wasn't seen on any footage en route, nor was he spotted in the store. It wasn't until January 8th that Brian was arrested for providing false statements and taken in for questioning at the station while his home was finally searched. It was discovered that on January 1st, he had gone to a hardware store in a different area, not on the list of approved locations he could visit under house arrest conditions. There, he spent nearly $500 on a significant quantity of cleaning supplies, plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop with a bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, presumably hoping his visit would go unnoticed. Horrifying discoveries in the family home. During the search, at first glance, nothing out of the ordinary or suspicious was found in the home. Everything was in its place, with no signs of struggle or bloodstains detected. However, When law enforcement descended into the basement, there was no longer any doubt. This was the scene of a gruesome crime. There, smeared bloodstains were visible everywhere, and among the old clutter, a bloodied knife and saw wrapped in towels were hidden. Previously, Walsh had admitted that on January 3rd, he visited his mother's home located on the other side of town. He claimed he had violated his house arrest conditions because his mother needed help with household tasks due to her deteriorating health. But after the grim discoveries in the basement, police suspected that on his way, the man could have disposed of evidence or parts of his deceased wife's body. All the trash bins in the area where the spouses lived, as well as along the route to his mother's house, were inspected. These searches yielded results, and in one of them, a kitchen hatchet with traces of dried blood and several blood-stained towels, similar to those found in the Walsh's basement, were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood in the basement on the towels, knife, hatchet, and saw belonged to the missing Anna, dispelling any remaining doubts about her demise. Search history reveals chilling intent. Police seized a laptop belonging to Mr. Walsh, as well as a tablet owned by the couple's eldest son from the Walsh residence. The search history on these devices left investigators in disbelief. Weeks before his wife's disappearance, Brian was actively searching online for information about the most favorable states for divorce in terms of property division. He also sought information on whether he could lay claim to the second home in Washington, D.C., owned by Amma and registered solely in her name, thereby uncovering a possible motive for the crime. Regarding the tablet, the first query made around in the morning on January 1st was, how long does it take for a body to start decomposing? This was followed by nearly 24 searches on how to dispose of a body, how to clean up blood traces, how to dismember a body, whether a body could be identified if the teeth were removed, how long DNA traces last, and whether a person could be charged with a crime if the body was never found. All this information was searched on his young child's tablet, the child of the woman he mercilessly dealt with. By January 3rd, Brian was already searching how and when can someone inherit the property of a person who has disappeared. Clearly, he was confident he would evade punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. Charges and trial on January 18th, Brian was formally charged with the murder of his wife, despite the fact that her body or any remains had not been found. Prosecutors believe that on the night of January 1st, Brian intentionally or accidentally took his wife's life and then decided to dispose of her body by dismembering it in the basement of their home. He then packaged the body parts in plastic and over the following days, discarded them in trash bins across different parts of the city. The area around the Walsh residence, as well as within a couple of kilometers, was thoroughly examined for evidence. Nearby wastelands, wooded areas, and bodies of water were also searched, but these efforts yielded no results. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty and refused to disclose what he had done with the body. Additionally, it was revealed that Anna had been feeling unhappy lately and had even considered divorcing her husband. She mentioned this several times during phone conversations with her mother and sister. The day before she disappeared, she called her mother asking her to fly from Serbia for a few days. However, her mother apparently did not take her daughter's words seriously and decided to postpone her visit. The trial of Brian Walsh is ongoing. The accused is currently being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility awaiting his next court date. Anna's mother has been following the investigation from her home as she has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has contacted the consulate in New York, which in turn has been in touch with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to ensure that Anna's mother is timely informed about the investigation and hearings. As for the Walsh's 3 sons, they are now under state custody. None of Brian's family members wish to take care of them, citing Anna's mother's age and poor health, and her sister, who currently lives in Canada, also declined to take in her nephews. Only Anna's close friend, Pamela Borden, has expressed willingness to take the boys in, preferring that over them being separated and placed in different foster homes. It's late afternoon in the Calbar town of Queensland's picturesque scenic rim region, and a cool fall breeze softly sweeps through hundreds of fresh sunflowers. Vanessa Fowler, a mother of 2 visits to remember her beloved little sister. Vanessa says it was her favorite flower. She was a great lady in every aspect. She was strong, resilient, and passionate. Vanessa is mourning the tragic murder of Allison Baden-Clay, her baby sister. What happened to her? Let us go into the investigation. Brisbane is the third most populous city in Australia and is located in Queensland. It's known for the river that runs through it. Despite its location beside a river, the town constructed an urban beach that is the size of 5 Olympic swimming pools. Tons of white sand are trucked in everywhere to preserve the street's beach. It was the place where the story of a woman's murder happened. It was among the most high-profile homicide cases Queensland has ever seen. The tale of the Baden-Clay family from Brisbane was first shown on Australian television in 2012. On April 20th, 2012, Friday, Gerard Baden-Clay called authorities at about 7:12 a.m. to report his 43-year-old wife, Allison, missing. He said that Allison had gone for a walk in their wealthy Brookfield neighborhood early in the morning. According to Gerard, she did this frequently. She did not, however, come for breakfast that day. He told Allison's parents the same thing. The police started looking for the missing person right away. First, they questioned their neighbors if they had seen anything or remembered seeing either Bade and Clay's vehicle between 8:30 p.m. Thursday and 8 a.m. on Friday. A Holden Captiva and Toyota Prado were the vehicles. A search involving hundreds of volunteers along with the police began immediately. An extensive investigation, including aircraft and police on horseback, was conducted across the rough terrain. In addition, they looked in the Dugwaller National Park's neighboring mountain forest. Firefighters also searched closed mine shafts. All of these attempts were organized by Sergeant Sharky Lang. According to Gerard, on April 23rd, police set up a mannequin in the Baden-Clay front yard, wearing the exact clothing Allison was last seen wearing. Allison was eventually discovered by a kayaker, not by the cops. On April 30th, the kayaker was near Anstead on Corll Creek. Allison was found at 11 a.m. on the muddy stream banks. She was dressed for a workout and resting on her side. Her arms were stretched out and her decomposition was advanced. Her blue shirt was pulled over her head, giving the impression that she had been dragged. Dental records were used to verify Allison's identification. According to the autopsy, Allison would have left significant gouge wounds on the intruder's face since some remains were under her nails. Her family and friends were beyond devastated upon hearing the news. Allison was a pure soul. She was a quiet and composed woman. On July 1st, 1968, Allison June Dickey was born. She was the second daughter of Priscilla and Jeff Dickey's 3 children. Allison was raised in Red Bank, a working-class area. She began her lifelong love of ballet at the age of 4, and her biggest dream was to start her own ballet studio. Allison won the Miss Brisbane beauty pageant at 25 in 1994 and was around 5 feet 6 inches tall. She was also an impressive polyglot, with Japanese, Dutch, English, French, German, and Swedish being among her languages. Her friends had always considered her to be lucky and could not have imagined such disastrous things to happen to this Wonder Woman. She was an ambitious woman who was on her way to accomplishing her dreams, but unfortunately fate stopped her. The family was beyond shattered and couldn't figure out who could have done it since Allison has no enemies. They didn't know how to convey the news to the 3 little souls waiting for their mommy to come back. Allison was the head of human resources at Flight Center Airport when she met Gerard Baden-Clay. He was based at their Toon Bowl office. On August 23, 1997, they married. Gerard Baden-Clay was born in Bournemouth, England. He moved to Australia when he was 10 years old with his parents and 2 younger siblings. He was the great-grandson of Robert Baden-Powell, the founder of the Boy Scouts of America. Gerard is around 6 feet tall, with a medium body and short brown hair. The couple moved back to England after their marriage but returned to Australia in 1999. Gerard and Allison were both employed with Century 21 real estate company in 2004 and had 3 lovely young daughters. Gerard Baden-Clay became the managing director of Century 21 real estate, after which he finally partnered with 2 others, with Gerard becoming in charge of their real estate company's finances. Toni McHugh was a client of Gerard's real estate firm in 2007. She was a married mother and ended up ending her 17-year-long marriage. A buddy of hers assisted her in obtaining employment with Remax Real Estate Company. This guy had been Gerard's business partner, and it was through him that he had met Tony. Tony worked hard and eventually became a special agent there. Authorities interviewed several people throughout the inquiry, including Tony, Gerard, and his business partners. They started putting the puzzle pieces together one by one. According to investigators, Allison's insurance was worth $800,000 to $950,000. Allison's estate was also handed to her parents. Her life insurance plans were included in this, which also ordered that her 2 insurance plans were ordered to be kept in trust. Investigators had also found that someone was working on collecting Allison's life insurance while her body was being autopsied. It was Gerard, and there they found some evident marks on his face, which were expected to be made by Allison. But these were just assumptions. There was not enough evidence to prove him as the murderer. Gerard was taken to court, where the Crown or prosecution said he sought to cash in on his wife's life insurance policy to pay off his debts. According to a forensic accountant, Gerard owed roughly $300,000 to various relatives and friends, while he barely had $70,000 in his bank account. Tony McHugh was brought into the scene. Tony McHugh had said that Gerard phoned her after his wife vanished and ordered her to be quiet. She also said that he did not have the financial means to divorce her. These shocking revelations meant that Gerard and Tony were having an affair with one another. Gerard had informed Tony that he intended to divorce his wife and marry her one day, and he often met Tony without his wedding band on. He confessed to Tony that he loved her and intended to divorce his wife for her. But he also stated multiple times that he couldn't leave Allison because she was depressed. Gerard had also set up a phony email account to contact Tony without Allison being aware during this time. Allison, according to Gerard, was monitoring his phone conversations and text messages and had even imposed a curfew on him. If Allison knew about the affair, she definitely would have been surprised because the pair was in the middle of marriage counseling and had no intention of splitting. 3 days before her abduction, the couple had attended a marriage therapy session. Gerard Baden-Clay liked to present himself as a devout middle-class spouse and parent. He was concerned about his social position and how others perceived him. The truth was completely different. Of course, Gerard had rekindled his romance with Tony McHugh. Gerard didn't appear to be working on his marriage, and he frequently publicly humiliated Allison. Gerard and Tony would be openly romantic toward one another at several work events they went together. He was also in debt to several friends and business acquaintances. Gerard admitted to his business partners that they were having financial problems at that point, which had surprised them because they had been having a great year and were unsure about where all of their money had gone. The business needed financial assistance, and all 3 partners agreed that any money leaving the company had to be signed. Gerard was no longer allowed to be the only one in charge of the capital. With Gerard Baden-Clay directly facing his partners, this barely lasted a few weeks. He didn't want to have to ask for their autographs constantly, and he repeatedly expressed his dissatisfaction with their lack of faith in him. Besides these incidences, Allison's diaries were introduced as evidence when the trial began on June 10, 2014. According to the journals, jurors heard Allison's views on her marriage and hardships, and how she tried to make her marriage work despite Gerard's treachery. Allison found out about the affair 3.5 years later. Tony was sacked from Gerard's Century 21 business in October 2011, putting an end to the romance. According to the prosecutor, Gerard murdered Allison for financial gain. On his behalf, Gerard testified. His side of the story was that he lied about everything he said in the past, but that everything he claimed at the trial was proper. Gerard acknowledged Tony's 4-year affair during his trial. He also admitted having previous relationships. However, none of them mattered because they were irrelevant to him. The jury didn't believe Gerard, and on July 15th, he was found guilty and condemned to life in jail with the prospect of release after 15 years. Gerard's defense attorneys sought an appeal in August 2015 based on a new premise. They were now claiming that Gerard had killed Allison accidentally during an altercation, indicated an intention to charge my client with murder. He became scared and attempted to conceal the murder. On December 8th of that year, Gerard was successful in his appeal. Instead of being found guilty of murder, he was found guilty of manslaughter. Even though Gerard lied about how he got scratches on his face and sought to cover up Allison's death, the Court of Appeals found a reasonable inference that he was innocent of premeditated murder. The court dismissed the Crown's motive of financial gain. His marital problems were insufficient to warrant a murder conviction, and the prosecution erred by failing to introduce evidence excluding the possibility of accidental death. In July of 2016, the High Court, consisting of 5 justices, heard an appeal from Queensland prosecutors who argued against Baden-Clay's conviction being downgraded. The High Court probed the defense about the change in their case. Gerard Baden-Clay was initially unconnected to Allison's murder. However, according to her autopsy, Allison died from a hit to the head after collapsing. It was ruled accidental since there was a prior argument between the two, and that cannot be counted as murder but rather an accident. In August, the High Court restored the original Gerard Baden-Clay conviction and the unanimous verdict. Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month is observed in May. We go into it knowing that in 2022, we've already lost 17 ladies in 4 months. Every time they've been slain, it's been by someone that they know. There are no winners in domestic violence. We've made some progress since Allison Baden-Clay's case stunned the country, but not nearly enough. Thanks to their support and devotion, Allison's friends and family have formed a foundation in her honor. Through education and assistance, the Allison Baden-Clay Foundation aims to raise attention to many types of domestic and familial abuse. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.